This is Technically Legal, a podcast about legal technology, innovation in the legal industry, and the impact tech is having on the law. I'm Chad Main, the founder of legal services company Percipient. On today's show, I'm talking to Justin Wales. He's a crypto attorney and head of legal for the Americas at Crypto.com. He's also the author of the Crypto Legal Handbook. When I was in law school back in the day, there were more than a few people who loved constitutional law, or con law as you call it in law school. It's the study of big questions that impact our daily lives and freedoms. Many a law student, when asked what they want to do when they get out, say con law. Maybe more than a few go to law school in the first place to pursue constitutional law. But the truth is, getting a job in the field is often easier said than done. That's what's so cool about today's guest, Justin Wales, who is now head of legal for the Americas at Crypto.com. Justin actually did start his career as a constitutional law attorney, and it all began with a paper he wrote in law school about an arcane legal topic, whether employment law contracts held by cruise ship workers were unconscionable. That article caught the eye of a lawyer taking that very issue to the Supreme Court, and suddenly Justin found himself on the inside track and on the team when the lawyer asked him to help with the case. That in turn helped him land a couple gigs at big law. For over a decade, Justin was immersed in con law, including some high-stakes cases. He even contributed to the landmark Obergefell gay marriage decision. But in doing all this research and work in con law, he came across his true passion, crypto and blockchain technology. He was first turned on to crypto when he saw that WikiLeaks accepted donations in Bitcoin. That, as they say, took him down the crypto rabbit hole, and he's never looked back. In fact, once word got out that Justin was into blockchain and crypto, emerging crypto companies started to hire him to help them ramp up their businesses, and Justin built a successful legal practice that didn't even exist at the time. Eventually, he left firm life to go in-house at Crypto.com. And then he wrote the book on crypto law. Literally, the Crypto Legal Handbook. Today on the show, we're going to find out what it takes to get into crypto law. Justin's going to tell us why you can't be a good lawyer in this space without actually using the technology. He's going to talk about the critical difference between centralized and decentralized finance, or DeFi as they say, and why DeFi might just be a small part of blockchain technology because crypto may be the very underpinning of transactions handled by artificial intelligence.
When I was in law school, I wrote an article about the most esoteric thing. It was like cruise ship employment contracts and whether they were unconscionable. And it was like a result of like I had gone on a cruise and I kept seeing the same waiter like at 6 a.m. and then at noon and then at 3 p.m. And I'm wondering like, how is this guy allowed to work this many hours? And you start diving into it and, it becomes like your little cause. So I wrote this article that nobody read and it got published. And then during my third year of law school, I got a call one day from an appellate lawyer who said, I'm taking this issue to the Supreme Court and I'm citing your article quite a bit. Do you want to help me write the briefs? So I went and I helped her write briefs for about 6 months. I had like the cushiest job you could ever imagine because I was like straight out of law school. I basically had 3 briefs to write over the course of like 4 months. And I would like ride my bike around Miami all day and I didn't have much else to do. And then once that project sort of died down, I kind of had my pick of where I wanted to go. And there was a guy who I knew who was doing some con law work and I was interested in First Amendment stuff like in law school at a small boutique firm. And I got hired then. And then on the day I got hired, they told me that the firm was merging into a large firm. So I ended up inexplicably in like a big law constitutional law practice.
But big law was not what you planned on going to do.
I didn't really have like much of a plan. Like all of my jobs sort of fell into my lap without much planning, and it just kind of were good opportunities that presented themselves, and I was smart enough to take them.
It's cool because so many people at law school would say, hey, I'd love to be a constitutional lawyer. And there's just not that many opportunities out there, right?
It's so lucky. I mean, it's really crazy, but like on the day that I realized like I needed to go and like find a real job, I called up this person I knew who was in this like practice. And I was like, "Hey, Scott, I need a job. Do you like think your firm wants to hire?" And he said, "It's so crazy. Yesterday, the associate told us that he's moving to across the state because his wife got pregnant. So we actually have an opening that like opened up today." So I went in like 2 days later for a lunch interview and I was hired on the spot. So again, it just completely like unfolded in front of me.
That's cool. So last question on the constitutional law is just intriguing. Were you mostly doing appellate work then, obviously?
It was quite a lot of appellate work. It was cert petitions, appeals, but we were also representing a bunch of media entities and newspapers, and actually municipalities at like the district court level as well. So there were like really interesting cases where we were going in on like emergency injunctions and getting restraining orders. So it was like a real like bare knuckles practice. It was awesome. It was a lot of fun, and it let me work on a number of high profile cases. I was like one of the I wrote like part of the briefs for like the Obergefell decision, which is the gay marriage case in the Supreme Court. So I got to work on like these like pretty high end matters with like really good lawyers from different firms, and I was always like the least qualified of the group. But you learn a lot when you're punching up.
So you big law for 10ish years. Do I have my math right?
Yeah, probably 11, 10, 11
Yeah.
years.
And then I know I can't recall in the book though, but I know you talk about when it was, but Bitcoin was how you started to get your interest in crypto. When and how does that happen?
Yeah, so that happened when I was in law school. I was always interested in like the First Amendment stuff in the back of my head. Like I was like, that's kind of what I wanted to do long term. And if you were in that world at that time, this is like during the Obama administration, you were following like the WikiLeaks saga. Basically, what was happening was the Obama administration was putting a lot of pressure on the payment processors not to like process donations to
That's right.
WikiLeaks.
Yeah, I remember that from the intro now. Yep.
So WikiLeaks was really the first non-crypto entity or group that was talking about Bitcoin. So I learned about it from then, and I started getting interested in it and going to meetups and kind of talking to people in the crypto community. But at the time, it was like not a viable option for a career. So what ended up happening was I ended up going into the First Amendment practice. And there's a lot of overlap between the First Amendment like philosophy and crypto philosophy. And I even wrote a law review article about like the First Amendment implications of like decentralized networks. But I always say, like, when you're the only lawyer someone knows, you're the lawyer that they call. So I was doing, primarily like appellate First Amendment work, but I was meeting all these crypto people, and eventually they started companies or they had questions. So they would call me, and I would bring them into the firm, and I would kind of sit and play quarterback for the real lawyers, right? The corporate lawyers, the financial lawyers, and regulatory attorneys. And you sit in those rooms long enough, you kind of pick up quite a bit. Probably like 3 or 4 years into my career, my personal like book of business was so big that the firm kind of took me aside and gave me a practice group and said, continue building in this practice. So I was, doing that until eventually I just essentially stopped doing the appellate work and was really just building this crypto practice.
The crypto practice you said it's your own group. That what didn't fall under financial services? Was it its own unit that you were in charge of?
And I guess like technically like there was a broader regulatory group that like allocated money to my group, right? Like in terms of like firm design. But no, I mean, we were like pretty autonomous. No one knew what the substance of like what we were trying to do. So we had like a good amount of freedom to like try to grow the practice, and it was pretty successful. I mean, this was 2013 to
Wow.
2015 is when like I was kind of doing it in the trenches, and then maybe 2015-ish is when I got the group, and then that led into like the first like real ICO boom.
That's pretty cool because those are early days for crypto, obviously. The Bitcoin white paper is like 2009, right? Is when it comes out. So it's, you're 4 or 5 years removed. That's pretty cool that your firm had the foresight to let you do this because I mean, still today, people are still pushback, about crypto.
They were supportive of it, and there was enough like early successes to show that there was something there. The guy who I was working for was a guy named Rick Olverman, and he was the First Amendment guy who hired me. And he like understood crypto. Like when I explained it to him, he like just completely understood it. And he was like so supportive of my practice, and he had enough weight in the firm that basically he said like, I'll vouch for him. Let him do what he wants. And he gave me like a huge amount of cover in the very early days. So I think that was like really like the most important factor was I had someone who was like very senior and well respected at the firm just say, consider this my pet project.
That's cool. What kind of work were you doing in those early days?
There was a lot of like the kind of normal like blocking and tackling for like a corporate formations. I mean, these were people who were first time starting entities, but from the regulatory, a lot of it was money transmission work, analysis, trying to get like these early money transmitter licenses in the space. A lot of it was token analysis and agreements. There was like a fair practice of like traditional companies that were looking to integrate blockchain or like even like considering things like private blockchains and trying to figure out whether that would make sense for them or not. But like, yeah, I mean, in terms of like regulations, a lot of it was around money transmission and the early FinCEN guidance.
We need to do more with less. That is the key takeaway nowadays from almost every survey of in-house counsel. But what if it didn't have to be that way? What if you actually could do more for less? By combining legal expertise and technology, Percipient enables legal teams to get more work done for less. Buried in contracts and sales is frustrated with turnaround time? We can help with that. Did you just get hit with a subpoena and reviewing 100,000 documents and files will tax your resources or cost you a small fortune in billable hours? We can help there too. Our team of legal professionals leverage tech and project management principles with the right amount of human oversight to deliver precise, efficient, and cost-effective legal solutions. Whether it's legal operations and contract management support, subpoena compliance, or document review, Percipient is your partner in really doing more for less. Percipient. Legal services powered by technology.
Yeah. Eventually, the early 2020s, you go to crypto.com in the legal department.
Yeah, so what ended up happening was I was at this firm for maybe 7, 8 years, and the mentor I had who gave me all that cover, he passed away pretty unexpectedly. So at that point, I had realized it was basically a regional firm that was maybe 500 lawyers, which is like a big firm, but not international.
Carlton
And we
Fields, right?
were, yeah, Carlton Fields. We were referring a huge amount of work out to international firms because it's a multi-jurisdictional industry. So when he passed away and there wasn't really the emotional reason to continue working there, I went to Candle Gates as a partner, and that was 2021. And then they were already representing crypto.com when I got there. So I met the crypto.com folks through Candle Gates, and within 2 or 3 months of me being at K&L Gates, they had made me the offer to come and lead the legal department. And so that's how I sort of got where I am now.
One of the things you say in the book is that to be a good in-house lawyer, you need to be a generalist. You can't be that, if you're so hyper-focused in being specialized in something, it's hard for you to be flexible as an in-house lawyer. Did you become that way just because all the work you were doing for these companies that were up and coming and needed this kind of work?
Part of it was in the early days, I resented the fact that I had to like grab someone with gray hair to sit in my meetings when I knew more about the technology that they would ever know. And I found that a lot of times I would catch them because they would say, "Oh, okay, my expertise is X. You're giving me this information. I'm viewing it through the lens of X." But I had been sitting with all of these different experts for a year or more, right? Hearing all of like their advice and realizing, well, this person is saying this, but doesn't that cause a problem with what Y said in this case? And I just realized that oftentimes we're blinded by our own expertise, and oftentimes when we're having a conversation, we are either consciously or subconsciously moving that conversation into something that we have specific knowledge on. So I caught enough mistakes from the experts because they just didn't have enough information about like even tangential areas of law that I realized like, okay, this is where maybe I can provide the most value to my clients is I might not know everything about a specific subject and I might need to like work with, experts who are really tactitional, but, I will at least know enough that they're not gonna be stepping into obvious landmines because I'm so focused on one area. And that was, like, sort of my philosophy early on. It's also much more fun. You end up having, like, a very varied practice. You get to work in lots of different areas and lots of different industries even. So, yeah, it's really benefited, and when I talk to law students, and I think I mentioned this in the book a bit, but, like, law firms preach, specialization, 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 and the reason why is because oftentimes they're hiring for a group, they're looking for an associate to work in X group for this partner who's very specialized. But in terms of long-term career development, I do think that having a really broad practice and understanding a lot of different areas of law, it just helps and it makes you a better lawyer.
Yeah, agreed. So the Crypto Legal Handbook.
Now you got the old version.
Yeah, I know I got the old version, the orange one. I got the old version. I know it's used in a lot of law schools. Was that your plan? Like, why did you write the book?
And there's a couple answers. Kind of two things happened at the same time. One is I was at crypto.com and we were hiring some folks and I was giving them like sort of like information about what I wanted them to know before they started the job. And a lot of times like people would like reach out to me on the internet or LinkedIn or email and they would say, I'm interested in like becoming a crypto lawyer. What should I do to start? And I kind of had a Word doc of links. I was like, okay, well, if you really are starting from zero, watch this YouTube video about the basics of like crypto and the philosophy of crypto, and maybe read this book, and maybe look at these guidance and in this area or whatever. And then over the years, like that kind of grew because I was like, well, this needs a little context, so it became like a little pamphlet that I would give. And at some point, I was like, I could probably organize this a little better, and let me flesh this out a little. And before I knew it, I had like an outline of a book, and I said, oh, okay, maybe this will be a good book. But separately from that, I had got completely suckered in to writing a chapter in this textbook by some lawyer, and I spent all this time putting this together, and then I said, "All right, well, how much you charging for this book?" And they said, "It's like $300 a textbook or $300 for students." I was like, "All right, well, how much money am I getting from it?" And it's like, "No, you're getting nothing except like a courtesy copy of the book." So I get the copy of the book and I'm reading through it, and it's like one of these things where like every chapter is written by a different law firm, which means like some summer associate wrote a chapter, right? And it's like some of the things are contradicting things I say in my chapter, or they're like not describing things correctly, and it just seemed like garbage. And I thought, well, if this is what like is getting passed out in school, I already have basically the making of a book. Let me spend a couple months. I naively thought, oh, let me take like a month or two to write this. And it ended up taking a year. But let me put this out and I can like create a resource for students that one is cheaper than like whatever they're going to get. Two is like I'm nimble enough that I can update this yearly, so it's not going to be out of date. And three, and maybe most importantly, is like it is like for better or worse, like this is Justin Wales's guide to crypto law. And it is like from one individual perspective, like my theories on like what is important and what we should be thinking about are there. It is not a neutral book. And I thought, well, that's at least like helpful instead of this segmented approach where every law firm has a group of five people who are putting everything together subject by subject. And then at the end, it's like reading the Bible. Like you just can't follow from book to book.
So is it going to be like Whales on Crypto? Is it like Prosper on Torts, right? Is it going to be like that?
Yeah. I mean, hopefully. I mean, it sort of depends. Like I always make the joke, the likelihood of the next edition is based on the sales of the prior edition. So far, I think I'm good with at least doing a 2026.
This book, Crypto Legal Handbook, and Read Write Own by Chris Dixon, which you reference in one of your resources, those are two I recommend to anybody out there. I'm going to get multiple copies of this now, but when Read Write Own, I bought like 5 or 6 copies. And when anybody wants to talk to me about crypto and what it is, I give those books out. So I'm going to start giving yours out too. So there's my
I
public
appreciate it.
service announcement for you.
This is either very interesting to people or like not interesting
Right.
at all. But my experience with going through traditional publishers made me want to do this self-published. So it's interesting is like I initially talked to like some folks who are in textbook publishing, and basically you're giving away so much of like the timeline to the publishers and you're giving away all the profits, and they're still expecting you to do like the majority of the work to like get this out. If you're okay with actually line editing your own book, or you have like some friends like I do, like I have like a really great friend who basically formatted it and created the cover for me, I just say like do it on your own because I'm able to like update in real time because it's done through like Amazon direct publishing.
So it's a drop ship. So when I ordered this, whatever I got was the most current at that time.
It's printed. So as a result, if there's something really big, I'll just pull up the draft. I'll change a couple lines or add another footnote. and then I'll say, okay, that's now the version. And it doesn't like create like a complete new version, but it allows like these incremental updates that are just impossible for traditional publication. I don't have like a marketing team behind it, but this is such a niche topic that you don't really need it. Like you go on podcasts and you kind of like meet law professors and say, "Hey, why are you making your like students pay $200 for a book that's 4 years old?
Right.
This one's 30."
Or some older, right? Someone's like,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
good segue. You were literally a trailblazer in becoming a crypto lawyer. If someone out there today calls you and says, I want to become a crypto lawyer, is it a viable choice nowadays? And if so, what's your recommendation? How do they do that? How do you pull it off?
It was so much easier when I started because there was like an empty field and you got to become a generalist like you had to become a generalist. Right now, the difficulty is so much of crypto law is really traditional financial services with like a kind of crypto sheen on it. There's a whole other area of like DeFi, which is like really interesting and what I consider to be like real crypto law. But for the most part, when people think crypto law is like, okay, Justin's job or like working at Coinbase or whatever, you are doing like a lot of traditional financial regulatory work, and that's harder to break into. So I do think that there's still like a lot of opportunities. I mean, there's a lot of hiring. It's harder to just have a broad practice because you're necessarily going to get like moved into, okay, you're a crypto lawyer and you're working on crypto, but you're really doing digital asset treasuries, or you're really doing ETFs or money transmission work or like securities tokens. And that's gonna like sort of narrow you. And it's on whoever I think is working in the space to try to take more of an industry wide approach rather than a practice group approach.
You just mentioned DeFi, decentralized finance, and how it's more interesting to you. And the stuff you talked about, financial services, more centralized. For the listeners, explain the distinction there. Like, what is decentralized finance, DeFi?
So the innovation of Bitcoin was this idea that a blockchain, which is just this ledger, can be maintained and operated programmatically and by a network of people all over the world without any single individual or company or small group of companies like controlling what is happening on that chain. And that idea has been extrapolated to other platforms. Ethereum is a one that a lot of people know. Solana is another one where you are now able to do more than just sending and receiving funds statically. You are able to build sometimes very complex programs utilizing the blockchain. And what has happened is that there's an entire parallel economy that is currently available where you're able to do essentially all types of banking and financial and sometimes non financial functions without going to any intermediary. And there's a lot of really interesting legal questions. For example, is the network supposed to be regulated in the same way as a bank if the network is facilitating banking transactions, or is it just the front end or the interface that allows you to, or is it so different than the one-to-one regulatory application doesn't work? So that's on the decentralized finance side. That is always and has always been like the most interesting side of crypto, but the ones that I think most people gravitate towards and think about and where they want to work are more on the centralized side, which is a company is offering services that are either denominated or that they're selling digital assets, they're utilizing digital assets in some way, but you are still like interacting one to one with the company.
One of the things you mentioned in the book, I think this gets lost, and I'd like to get your take on why, is, you know, there's a lot of laws out there just generally that apply to actions in crypto. Why does that kind of get lost? Everybody thinks that crypto is this amorphous thing that needs to have a law for everything that it does.
Well, I think because there are enough things about crypto that are different that sometimes it's hard to just like apply the law directly to it. This is the idea of like the law of the horse, right? When cars started being invented, these are horseless carriages. Do you just apply horse and livery law to automobiles? Well, in some cases, maybe you do, but also like these are different enough, and the dangers and considerations to society are different enough that maybe you do want to have some specific regulations, and that's always been the debate. I come out on the view that there are probably new laws that should be created to make sure that like the digital asset industry is managed appropriately, but those should also be created with the view that these are really innovative networks and you don't want to treat a network like a bank. So this is the debate in Congress and sort of elsewhere at all times, which is how much regulatory pressure do you put on the industry while still allowing the industry to innovate and be flexible as the market demands.
Going back to the uniqueness of crypto, one of the things that I really did love about your book, and one of those important takeaways about becoming a crypto lawyer said, rule number one is use crypto, right? I understand how it
Yeah,
works. Do you still run into that where lawyers claim to be crypto lawyers and they really don't know what they're doing?
more so than ever. I cannot tell you how many times I'm talking to a lawyer. They lead like a crypto group at a gigantic, like top 20 law firm, and they'll say something or they'll send me a draft, and it'll just like show that they have no idea what they're talking about. Or what is more likely, they were aware of crypto and they learned a lot about it and got really interested in it until 2017 or 2020, but they're like understanding of what the industry is today is kind of frozen in time to the point where like they first got interested in it, right? So you can kind of tell with like some of the language that they use or like the projects that they cite. But yeah, it's like very, very, very few of us in the industry actually use it and kind of believe in it as an innovative tool for the future and not just an asset that can be traded like anything else. And I think that's a problem when you're trying to come up with creative arguments about why something applies or doesn't apply or how or advising regulators or lobbyists on how these things should be treated because you really need to understand not only where the industry is today, but where it will ideally go to like the best version of crypto.
It's also important to note too, you say just because you're into crypto and a crypto lawyer doesn't mean you need to be a cheerleader either, right? You need to be tempered. You need there needs to be reasonable regulation. But I think your point was this is important. I'll get this out there is if you're in this world, you should at least know how a wallet works. Like even if you don't want to continue to do it, you should know how the nuts and bolts of it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, totally. And also, it's like I do think that the only way to have a happy life is that you enjoy the things you're working on. Like, if you think that all of crypto is bad and that this is the ultimate promise of a decentralized or a more transparent financial system is unlikely because of this technology, then why would you spend your time working on it? I was talking to a couple young lawyers a month or so ago, and they were okay, we're thinking about getting into crypto, and they hated it. Like they hated crypto, and like they and I was like, why don't you should guys should be like joining like plaintiffs law firms and suing crypto. If you don't like it, like you shouldn't be getting into it. There's enough areas of law that you can get into that you don't like, and it's not like there are easier ways to make money than becoming a crypto lawyer in 2025.
That brings up another good point you raised in the book. You got both sides of the coin. We got the crypto cheerleaders. You got the people that claim they hate crypto, and they, at the policy level, at the kitchen table level, right? We've got these tribes, and what gets lost is technology's neutral. Like there's benefits to no matter what side of the aisle you're on, right?
Yeah, and I think the industry is doing a good job trying to say like at least like it's the technology itself is nonpartisan and they're trying to get more away from like the politicization of crypto that has been happening the last couple of years. But yeah, I mean ultimately it's like the internet. Like the internet can be used for good and the internet could be used for bad and it could be used for commercial and non-commercial activities and how do you create an internet that is able to foster all these different perspectives and really be a platform for human ingenuity? And that's what I think like crypto should be ideally is like it's just a platform and a way of us to communicate digitally in order to do all sorts of interesting things in the future, many of which we can't even contemplate now because they require other advances in different technologies that haven't been invented yet. But it's a long-term infrastructure play, not a short-term profit play.
I want to get a deeper take from your book too. Another thing you say to those ends is we who are pro crypto and crypto enthusiasts always talk about, rather than the promise of the technology. We always talk about technology itself. It's a distributed ledger and it's immutable. And this is the next thing that just goes over people's heads. So how much of this is to blame on the pro crypto people that focused on that aspect about the coolness of the technology, just stop bringing it down to the every guy's level of, it just makes transactions cheaper and easier between people, right?
The way I think about it is the core innovation of crypto is that it allows you for the first time to make something that occurs entirely digitally rare, right? So you are able to like demonstrate that something that is completely digital is rare without having to rely on like a central company to say, yes, indeed, that is a rare asset. And if you take that concept, you can bring an entire world and generation of innovations and build on that foundation. And that is a concept that I never hear talked about. And instead, they talk about, well, what about like these incremental efficiencies on the Swift network? And it's like, okay, but for most people, for long enough, a wire transfer is okay, or your Visa card works fine enough. There are like edge cases in parts of the world where you don't want your government controlling your assets because of like inflation or corruption. And I think those are like really good use cases for Bitcoin. But for the broader crypto, it's like, well, why do we need any of it? It just seems like there's just like a billion tokens that are being put on the market and all of them are eventually going to zero. And I think where we've lost ourselves in some ways is we're not demonstrating that like there is a whole level of infrastructure that can be built on this idea that digital things can be rare and that can change the manner in which you interact with the internet, the manner in which your things that are increasingly connected to the internet interact with each other, your relationship with artificial intelligence eventually, your relationship to lots of different financial products which are expensive because there is like built-in friction. So I just don't think we've like demonstrated the future use case yet. And it's challenging because most of those future use cases are so nascent or they're experiments that will need to fail in order to get better that people just don't really appreciate how innovative this thing is. But like once they do, they will, right? It's like it's going to be slow and then there will be enough built onto these like crypto networks that I think people will just forget that it's a crypto network and they'll be like, "Oh, this has gotten better. Oh, I guess it's because of crypto, but who cares?" Like lidar technology like was slow to improve and then it improved and now we have self-driving cars.
Yeah, that's a great example. Hey, we got a self-driving car. That's cool. Like we don't know the lidar, the whole thing. Like most of us don't know how that works, and we don't care, right?
But also it's like the self-driving car and the internet and Uber or like anything you can think of. It's not one person created an invention that was like fully formed. It was lots of iterative improvements in software and hardware and programming and then also like the culture has to change to like be comfortable with self-driving cars and the laws have to change to allow them and all of those things take like years and years and years to like come together until you get a point where like a product is usable and understandable by people who don't live and breathe technology.
So go back to the policy a little bit. You're at a bar association event in your town there, and a lawyer, let's say a business lawyer, just a general business lawyer comes up to you and says, "Hey, what do I need to know about the Genius Act and the Clarity Act and all this crypto stuff's going on in Washington?" What do you tell them at the high level? What should every lawyer know about this? What's changing and what the policy is right now?
Yeah, I mean the Genius Act, honestly, like most people don't probably need to know much about either. Right? Like I need to know a lot about them, but like most people just don't because their interactions with the products, either now or eventually, won't really change under these regimes. The Genius Act is a stablecoin bill that basically sets out requirements for which issuers of stablecoins need to meet in order to have their product come to market. So a stablecoin is just a token that is tied one to one with usually like a fiat currency like the dollar. So I'm an issuer, you give me $1, I hold it in my bank account, and I issue one Justin dollar. It's worth $1. It's tied to the dollar that I have in my bank account, and you're able to now use that dollar digitally on different platforms. And they right, so you want to create custodial and sort of record keeping and all sorts of different requirements around the ability of issuing and managing the treasury for stablecoins. That's the Genius Act. The second part, which is the Clarity Act, is for the last 4+ years, the US government has really tried to kill the crypto industry. And they were trying to do it by weaponizing the ambiguity within something called the Howey test, which is a securities analysis of something called an investment contract. And an investment contract is typically is I go to you and say, hey, Chad, I have a business. Will you invest $100 into my business? And if you do, I'm going to pool that with a bunch of other people's money. I'm going to use that money and manage that money in a way that grows all of our investments. And then I'm going to distribute the profits. That's kind of an investment contract. And what the SEC had kind of strategically started saying, and I document the whole thing in the book, but that tokens themselves are securities, investment contract securities, and they should be treated as such under the securities rules. Now, the problem is that the securities rules were written in the 1930s, and they don't contemplate the types of disclosures and reporting and requirements that are needed for disclosing information about a digital asset. Like, just it's not a one-to-one application. So the industry would go to the SEC and say, well, how are we supposed to comply with these 1930s era rules? And the SEC would say, we're not telling you, but we're going to sue you. So there was several years of litigation. The industry, crypto industry, I think, was very close to succeeding in litigation and would have been vindicated. But when President Trump got elected for the second time, the attitude within the SEC about that question changed, and then they've taken more over the last couple months, more of a view that we should be working with the industry and trying to solve these gap issues in order to allow innovation and allow this industry to thrive in the United States. So the Clarity Act is an attempt to bring clarity as to how does the SEC and what parts of the industry does the SEC oversee? How does the CFTC, which is Commodities Future Regulator, what parts do they oversee? And, how do we manage this industry as it grows, knowing that we have this kind of dual regulatory system of financial regulators?
Okay, as we close this out, crystal ball, obviously crypto is impacting the financial industry. What's the next? 5 years from now, outside of finance, what do you think blockchain technology is going to be impacting?
I think in the grand scheme of things, put aside Bitcoin, which I think is going to be like it's its own category and its own thing, and it has its own trajectory. But I think in the grand scheme of things, the blockchain and crypto is a very small footnote in the story of AI. And as more and more innovations happen with respect to like AI agents, self-driving cars, the Internet of Things kind of concept where everything is connected and talking to each other, I think all of those things have to talk to each other on a system that is open, and they have to be able to communicate information and also financial information and financial transactions using some type of interoperable platform or network. And I think that's what crypto is. So I think in the long run, we're not really talking too much about crypto anymore, and we're just talking about AI, and the crypto infrastructure is just underneath it.
Cool. Good stuff. Good stuff. Could talk about this for hours. Justin, I appreciate your time. If people want to get a hold of you, find the book, learn more about it, where do you want to send them?
You can go to justinwales.com and it'll direct you to the Crypto Legal Handbook website.
Okay, that's a wrap for today's episode. As always, we really appreciate you listening. If you want to subscribe, you can find us on most major podcast platforms like Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. Also, if you like us enough, I hope you leave us a favorable review. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, this has been Technically Legal.